and the modelling. So we're able to go door knocking and will go door knocking and have face-to-face engagements with homeowners. That's going to be resource intensive, but critical. And it would be good, and we'll be seeking support from elected members and more support from the local community groups that we already work with to make sure there is anybody that we haven't identified, to try and identify homeowners that haven't opted in, and ask for support to engage and identify those homeowners between now and September. Just a quick update on categorisation numbers, simply since the report was produced. The report's a couple of weeks old now since it was written. You can see when the report was written, the figures are along the top in terms of how many categories we got through, a total of 685. As of the last couple of days when we produced this slide, that number's now at 803 categorisations, and you can see the makeup of that along the bottom. It's self-explanatory, Cat 1, Cat 3, etc. So an indication of how many categorisations are being done simply in the space of a couple of weeks. Wanted to just talk about demolition. Demolition's now started, deconstruction I should say, rather than demolition. We've begun the deconstruction of the first home in Murawai. There's another 24 there that are on the list that we're beginning to work through now. What we do before we start deconstruction of any of the homes is go and have a good look at them. One of the things we're looking for is asbestos. We already have 9 homes with asbestos in them already in the small sample that we've already engaged with. There's obviously time and cost in asbestos, so there's something to be conscious of there. We've moved to Ranui now, so we've getting into beginning to think about the deconstruction of the first homes in Ranui. Probably about 30 homes a month, sorry, is what we think we can get through with the deconstruction programme. When I say deconstruction, I use the word intentionally. There's homes that are actually deconstructed fully. There's homes where portions of them are deconstructed and materials are recovered. Some homes we're going to lift up and take away and use elsewhere. And a last resort is to smash homes to pieces and simply then try and separate the materials at landfill. We prefer not to do that for obvious reasons. It's quite a long tail on that demolition, deconstruction. If you did the maths, 30 a month, it's going to take a long time to get through 600 or 700. We're aware of that. We've only just recently engaged with this activity, so now we need to work out how we can make that go more quickly. We don't want it to take as long as the numbers would suggest that it will. We have spent the last month or so moving from a place where, when we really started categorisation in a big way at the beginning of this year, we were concentrating on low-hanging fruit and to get categorisations done as quickly as we could. Obvious category 3s, obvious category 1s, and where we could, trying to concentrate on homeowners that were displaced. If I'm being honest with you, that's not the most structured way in the world of doing something like this, but it was suitable and necessary at the time to get the programme moving. We've spent the last month or so now trying to be more purposeful. So we have consolidated what we've been doing in flooding and geotech into one place. So we've got an awful lot of data and a big SharePoint site and Excel spreadsheets and all the sorts of things that you would expect for flooding. And we've got a similar system running in parallel for geotech. And it's been necessary that we consolidate all of that into one place to be a lot more purposeful about how we continue categorisation and less reactive. So spent the last few weeks doing that. So what that does is It gives us better forecasts, so now we can forecast by area in a combined way for both flooding and geotech, rather than having to do this stuff separately. Gives us really good improved visibility of data at a property level, and we can separate all of this stuff now by suburb and local board, and I'll show you that in a second. We've got a lot better capability now to analyse all of that data in one place and make combined decisions. So that's built. That single source of the truth, if you like, is now built, and I'll show you in a second. In fact, I'll show you it now. So this is what's called a Power BI dashboard. So it's a smart bit of computer wizardry that I wouldn't claim to understand, which pulls information from both the flooding teams and the geotech teams and puts it all into one place in real time. Important to note, there's a big data only thing there diagonally across the screen. What that should say is something like example data only, examples hanging off the bottom of the screen. This is actually quite close to being very accurate data, but it still needs some work, so my caution to you is don't write down any numbers from here and treat them as gospel. In a couple of weeks' time, you will be able to do that, and we'll be engaging with whoever wants to engage with us by local board or suburb to help you work with this data and to understand this data. But right now, it's still in construction. What happens, though, if you click on that map on the left-hand side and continue to click on it, it will zoom in right down to street by street, address by address. So every address and home that we're dealing with at the moment, there's about 2,717 of them that we're actively engaged with that have opted into the process, are on that map, and you can zoom in and find every single one of them on that map fairly precisely. The data on the bottom right-hand side, which begins to give you a feel of which of the local boards have had the most significant effects. So you can see Rodney there on the left-hand side with some big numbers all the way across to Manurewa on the right. You can filter this by suburb as well as local board. And when you do that, that goes away off the screen. That long tail of statistics there, sort of from Rodney through Hawick down to Manurewa, if you filter by suburb, it's 2 or 3 times that width. So a really surprisingly high number of suburbs have actually been impacted, a lot more than perhaps people realise. What else can this software and data do for us? From a governance perspective, we can produce information that looks like this. So we can see the numbers of desktop assessments that we've done. Again, we can split that by geotech and by flood, or we can combine it, and we can interrogate it by suburbs and local boards. So all of those big coloured boxes on the bottom of the screen there, if you're actually in this software, you could click on any of those boxes, and that would zoom in again on a map and specific details and graphs and charts of that local board area. Or should you choose to, you could also do it by suburb. The most powerful use of this data and tool is predictive. It's all very well looking backwards, and what I'm showing you now is historical, and clearly you can see that these are months that have passed. It's its predictive ability that we've built this for. We're now populating it with when we think desktop assessments will be done for those that haven't been categorised, when we think site visits will be done for those that haven't been categorised, and subsequently when we will get to a categorisation home by home for each of the 2,717 homes that are in this tool. And that's the most power, and the key reason that we've built this is to get some accuracy around predictions of how long things are going to take, suburb by suburb, and local board by local board. As I said, in the next week or two, we're going to be looking for volunteers to just work with us as we finalise how this works, in terms of what do you want to see, what's most important to you from a local board or a suburb perspective, and we can produce all kinds of dashboards that show all kinds of things. So we'll just be asking for a couple of volunteers to help work with us on this over the next couple of weeks. Just a quick update on the various agreements we now have with the central government, not the central government. Minor variation in progress there. You'll see the sort of second, third line down for a $2 million storm readiness fund. You might have seen Minister Mitchell announce that in the last week or so. That is it's essentially a fund to be distributed to communities and community groups to help with waterways and the like, and it's more about winter readiness actually than storm readiness. I think it's called Winter Readiness Fund. We're kind of moving into the next stage of detail now with our interactions with central government. The big headline agreements are all executed, as you'll see up towards the top of the page there. And everything that's on the go at the moment is around PDPs. So important to know that particularly the 2C infrastructure projects, community infrastructure projects, and 2P, the whole tranche of 2P projects, there's no money for that until we've written PDPs, and central government has also accepted those PDPs, not just the mechanics within our own local government. A business case, project development business case type thing. Sorry, Councillor. Acronyms. The 2P grant scheme, what we've agreed to do is it isn't practical to be going to central government again and again and again for relatively small amounts of money for the 2P property level projects. So we've bundled all of that, and the current conversation is about just writing one business case for all of the 2P projects. That's looking like being about $60 million in terms of the scale of that 2P property level interventions. In terms of the 2C, the community level infrastructure, 9 projects at the moment that we're talking to them about in relative detail. Government share of that, central government share of that is probably about $400 million. So those are the sorts of numbers that we're now negotiating. There's several hundred intolerable risk to life categorisation homes in those 2C projects, and considerable wider benefit to infrastructure and other homes, as you might recall from previous conversations that we've had with you about those projects. I might just leave sort of the facts and figures there for now, and ask Linda to talk about some community work that's been done.
Kia ora, thank you, Matt. Yeah, so as I know, I do not need to remind you, recovery is much bigger than the categorisation process, and from a community and social recovery perspective, what we know from other disasters is that there's often about a 5 to 10 year tail on recovery. So it's really important that we're seeking to understand what impacts are out there in community and what the sector is doing to support those needs, so we can in turn understand what they need from us. Over the last few months, we've been engaging with mana whenua, the community and voluntary and social sector, and undertaken needs assessment research in our priority communities to really get a grasp on what those key needs are within communities. And that's summarised for you in the summary report that's on your agenda. But I'll just quickly race through that. Sorry, can we just flick? I have the power. Sorry. Thank you. So that's all good. What we know is that the extreme weather events have had a significantly negative impact on the well-being of Aucklanders. And, you know, just again, context around scale there is that there are around 40,000 households in Auckland that required support following the weather events. So what we're really interested in through this work is understanding where those whānau and households are now and what ongoing needs are presenting. So through the course of our engagement, we heard again and again how the timing of the weather events coming off the back of those COVID lockdowns, which were particularly bad here in Auckland, and now in the midst of this cost of living crisis, has made the impacts far worse. People were already struggling, and those who were already struggling have been hit hardest by this. We heard from our engagement that the stabilising effect of ongoing uncertainty about the future was a key issue. Trying to deal with the recovery process in itself is a challenge, and that there's a fundamental fear emerging about the future. Key needs that were identified consistently through all of our engagement was around health and well-being. So we heard that the storm events have had significant impacts on individuals and whānau, physically, spiritually and emotionally. Those health and well-being needs ranged from trauma related to the events themselves, anxiety about future adverse weather events, stress in addressing the impacts of the events, so negotiating through the insurance process, the rebuild process, the categorisation process, etc. Isolation and loneliness has come up again and again, and I think it's one of the personally, I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we're facing here in Auckland, that because of the extent of impacts, but the very wide nature of the spread of them, there's a lot of people who are struggling through this alone. They don't have neighbours, they don't have a sense of being part of a larger recovery effort and are feeling incredibly isolated because of that. There's grief, and that's not just over the tragedies associated with the losses of lives, but about loss of possessions, family treasures that are gone forever, photo albums, grief about not being able to stay in the community that you love. And we're certainly starting to hear about some real stresses within families and relationships. The second key issue is around housing and accommodation, which will be a surprise to no one, I'm sure. But what we heard, which I suppose is of note here, is that the impacts are being felt across the housing system. So we were already a housing system in Auckland that was struggling, and this has just exacerbated the issue. We're starting to hear more and more reports of overcrowding, of people returning to homes that are unsafe or unhealthy. And again, that separation from all that they know, from cultural, familial, social ties, is having a really negative impact on people. And then we heard that for some whānau, the financial toll of these weather events will be significant, ongoing and really, really difficult to recover from. There's a real fear that we're hearing around the potential for intergenerational impacts as a result of these weather events, where people are losing their most significant family and one and only and most significant family asset. They're not able to repurchase a home, and therefore their children and their children's children's ability to get back onto the housing ladder is going to be significantly impacted. And yeah, I won't talk too much more about that. If I could flick on. So those are really the top three key issues, but there were other consistent issues that were identified, and they include that many Aucklanders, we're hearing, are still struggling to access the information and support that they need to navigate their recoveries. That may be about the suitability of information or services, or it may be about whether the provision actually exists to meet their needs. Insurance is coming through really, really loud and strong. I'm sure you're hearing it as well, but people are really, there's been significant progress in settling claims here in Auckland, but for those who have yet to settle, there's significant stress associated with trying to do that. And we're also hearing about when the events occurred that there were many people who lacked sufficient insurance coverage, and that includes for vehicles and contents. And we're also hearing, as I'm sure you are, about the prohibitively high future insurance premiums, or the prospect of being unable to access insurance in the future. And lastly, there's quite a lot in here in terms of infrastructure and planning, but I'll just talk through the key points. This in here sits a real fear about how prepared we are for future weather events, and that's both in terms of how we work with community and with the social sector to be able to respond to an event, and also how prepared our assets and our infrastructure are. There's frustration being expressed about the slow speed at which we're dealing with infrastructure issues, and that's really seen to be exacerbating stress and tension within communities and undermining trust. Interviewees and people we engaged with also wish to see council undertake more active engagement with communities around identifying those natural hazards and really working together to think about how we get ready for future events. So, the issues that I've talked to in here are clearly big issues that go beyond Auckland Council's scope to be able to deliver, but undertaking this work was really important, not least because it gives people in community a voice and an opportunity for us to hear what's happening for them. But we have a really important role in terms of advocating to government and others to make sure that there are services and supports and investment going into the right place. And I will leave it there.
Okay, we've got a few, starting with the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair, and look, just thank you to your team for your ongoing work. I know it's challenging for everybody, including you as a team, so thank you for what you're doing. Look, I'm going to ask you a question that you haven't brought up today, but I know about it, so just for the benefit of my colleagues. So a few weeks ago, we met with the head of the Bankers Association to discuss how the banking industry could assist people who had been affected by the weather events. So could you please outline some of the outcomes of that meeting and next steps? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Councillor Simpson. We did meet with the banks, and they made several key points about kind of the here and now, and then we did talk to them about the future too. In terms of the here and now, one of the key messages that they wanted us to relay to homeowners was don't wait to engage with your bank. Don't wait for your categorisation. Don't wait to engage with your insurers. Don't wait for anything. As soon as you have a problem, if you've been affected by flooding or geotech or whatever, engage with your bank as one of the first people that you engage with. They stressed to us that all of the banks have welfare teams, so there are people who are not simply bankers, no offence to bankers, who can and will engage in issues of welfare and stress and challenge. They talked to us actually about some of the constraints, though, that they face in terms of being able to be as flexible as perhaps they would like with customers, and explain to us some of the regulation that sits above and around banks, which constrains what they can and can't do in terms of flexibility in particular. They reminded us that there's a banking ombudsman, so if that engagement with banks isn't going well, that customers and homeowners can engage with the bank ombudsman. And customers also, homeowners, can engage with our navigators. We've got some degree of experience in our team with helping navigate the banking landscape. Looking further ahead, I reminded the bankers that the Cyclone Recovery Unit will be the lead agency in thinking how this can all be done better next time for New Zealand Inc. It was something that we put in our funding agreement with central government last year, that we didn't want to go through this again. This isn't going to set a precedent how we've all had to deal with this particular situation, both centrally and locally. Sounds like the CRU are going to take the lead on what can be done better next time. So I'm going to hook the bankers up and make sure that they're part of that discussion, and the insurers, incidentally, with the Cyclone Recovery Unit.
I just have one more, if I may, quickly, and that is paragraph 23 in the report concerns me. You've highlighted that mental health is a big issue, and obviously we can tell by the amount of people who've applied for help versus how much money there was. Do you feel confident that central government is assisting in that space and that there will be that support for people who are still struggling?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Look, what's clear is that there is no funding allocated beyond this financial year to support the implementation of the social sector recovery plan, and that is where we would expect to see funding to support following a disaster and in recovery. We are having active conversations with government about how they will support those needs into the future. I can't give you a response.
So, but meantime, are we channeling people to the different social agencies that are available for that extra support?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Very caring. Can I have Andy Baker, please?
Thanks, Mayor. So, look, are we absolutely confident that what we're doing is in a timely manner? And I guess that question comes from the fact that on more than one occasion I've had to give a nudge to say, can you have a look at this property, because they've heard nothing. And then they're getting the messages, and as we work towards that 30th of September and the admission that this is a really time-consuming process, that we still got properties, and I talk about properties in Pukekohe that I know about, that are yet to be categorised, whilst ones on either side of them have, and that those people are getting told, yep, it'll be February, now it's going to be March, now it's going to be April. And as we work towards that September date, and then they get told there's vouchers, but that's going to take several weeks for you to receive those vouchers. I mean, geez, give them to me, I'll drop them off today. You know, it's how are we operating? Are you confident that we are doing everything we can? Because when you get those sorts of stories, it calls into question that actually we're making it harder than it, and I don't know, but it's not, because all of those mental health things and all of those issues that you've talked about, there are people out there still, and that's within our control. There's a lot without, but you know, I just want to know if we're doing it, and how can we potentially be more responsive if we can.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Let me preface what I'm about to say with, I appreciate that we can never go fast enough. You can never go fast enough in these situations. You can never get to, and I've used this phrase before and I'll use it again, if I had a magic wand that would get to thousands of homes tomorrow, I would wave it. We are, I mean, just to get into a teeny bit of detail about one of the questions you asked, it's quite a broad question. When you talk about 3 homes in a row, for example, wherever they may happen to be, and the one on the left and the one on the right has been categorised, but the one on the middle hasn't, there can be numerous reasons for that. There's variables around when they all opted into the scheme. There's variables around what we know from desktop assessments of those 3 properties in terms of which are at the greatest risk. Maybe the two that we've got to are clear category 3s, so we've gone to them because they're clear category 3s, and the one in the middle is perhaps can benefit from a 2C solution, a community level engineering solution that we're still designing and still working through and thinking about. So that's kind of to that specific point, but if talk more broadly, we've learned and are learning an enormous amount day by day by day as we get into this categorisation. Remember, we only just brought the last of these categorisation processes to you really late last year, a couple of weeks before Christmas. We were still working out how to do category 2P and what the process looked like, and you were signing it off for us. So we're now into category 2P. As we get into category 3 and 2C, category 1, there's nuance upon nuance in all of this categorisation that we're picking up day after day. For example, we've tons more category 2Ps than we expected. I really did think that we were going to have a small number of property level intervention solutions. They're looking like being way up at 100 plus, maybe 200 now, category 2Ps. That's really intensive work. The category 2P gets your engineers into detail, backwards and forwards discussions with quantity surveyors and homeowners and to figure out the 2P solution. Is it viable? Is it cost effective? When at the same time, instead of having those conversations and trying to work out what to do about a category 2P, they could be smashing out a whole bunch of category 1s. So we're learning as we go along, still adding resources. Again, this morning I was signing off hundreds of thousands of dollars to more consultants to bring more people in to help us with this work. I'm not sure there was an answer there, but...
Phil Wilson, please.
I was just going to comment on this general area because Matt and I have been talking about this a lot, and I think, you know, the starting point is just to again acknowledge that, you know, there are people in difficult situations and needing us, wanting us to go as fast as we can, and we've absolutely got that intent within the recovery team, and there may be community representatives and affected people online. So, you know, I just want to give voice to the fact that people are trying really hard here. What we need to do is keep checking ourselves and identifying any options that we have to speed it up, even if there are some cost implications to doing that. That was the gist of the Minister's letter to us earlier in the week as well, and as I said earlier in proceedings, you know, I think we're all on the same page there. We all want the same outcome, which is the right result as soon as possible, in as many situations as possible. I indicated that we want to have a workshop with you next week, and I think there are some particular things that we need to explore. There is complexity in this around the Category 2C solutions relative to Category 3. I know this probably sounds a bit complicated, and there are some issues in terms of where the money sits in which bucket and our decision making around this, and therefore there are parallel discussions going on with central government to make sure that we don't let the construction of the scheme done months and months ago without full intel, frankly, about what was happening on the ground. We need to kind of use that to kind of inform some adjustments here, in my view. That's the gist of the discussion that we want to have with you next week. So possibly not helping, but just want to kind of reinforce for the team and Matt in particular that things are, you know, we're exploring all the avenues to try and kind of speed things up.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thank you. Matt, you may be aware that under the performance of the CEO earlier this morning, I asked about the adequacy of our advocacy. It related particularly to Category 3 buyouts, where there were family trusts in place. I'm well aware of the press release the government put out, but I also note that we don't always agree with government and we often push back. And I want to know what advocacy is taking place in those special circumstances, because as you have correctly pointed out, there's a lot of stress and a lot of trauma for a lot of families.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take that one. Yeah, so absolutely. I think this is an area where we probably do disagree with government, and we are actively advocating to them to relook at the eligibility for those with homes held in trust. We understand that it is a complicated process to do that, and that means it has taken more time. But we are working with the Deputy Mayor's Office and the Mayor's office. At the moment, we have a advocacy letter to ministers drafted, seeking both a review of the eligibility requirements as it relates to homes held in trust, but also in relation to the duration of funding for the provision of that assistance. At the moment, 30th of June of this year is when that assistance runs out, and we know that there's going to be a lot of Aucklanders who require that assistance beyond that point.
So to speed things up, is there anything that we can do as elected members to encourage you from the CEO down to be able to progress this?
I think the answer probably is that, you know, knowing we have your support and backup to, if you like, strengthen that advocacy and to continue to work with the Mayor and Deputy Mayor is probably the key to this. It really can only be solved, I would suggest, at a political level.
Thank you, Phil, and I'm happy to support in any way I can because, like all of you, we want to be able to resolve as many of these awful situations for people as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, and just putting my hand up to you asked for some volunteers earlier, and I'm not physically there, so this is me putting my hand up to go through that Power BI stuff and things like that. Very interested in this space. Thank you for your work. I do have a few questions. One is I've asked before about Linda, you mentioned the long tail of the recovery work, and I guess I'm wanting a little bit of information about thinking about the exit plan for the recovery office and when are we likely to see, so I'm not asking for the plan now, but when are we likely to see a bit of a plan about how some of these functions are going to get embedded into other parts of council as the recovery office exits? Because, you know, we've talked about this before, but I'm sort of wanting to get a sense of when the timeline might be about when we might start to see a plan of transition on that specific aspect of it. And then I've got a couple more, please.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Phil's asked me to bring that transition plan to you in June, so that will come to the June GB. It's already been drafted as we speak, and the first version of it will come to the June GB.
Excellent, thank you. So the next question I had was around the part of the report that's around storm impacted land, and I see there that you're bringing a draft policy to us in a couple of months. What is the involvement going to be for local boards in coming up with that draft before it gets to us? Just acknowledging that in a lot of cases they'll be inheriting some of these assets, and in the context of some of the conversations we're having around how their funding works and their future assets, it'd be useful, I think, to have their input and no doubt mana whenua input, actually, just thinking about it off the top of my head, at as early as possible a stage. So what's sort of the thinking there, please? And then I've got one more.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I'm getting advice from both directions here. We've been to the mana whenua forum already with some of the early thinking about what that might look like to engage there. And at the end of April, a similar exercise is going to happen with the local boards once the thing's a bit better shaped up at the end of next month.
Great, thank you. Last question is we've inevitably end up talking a lot in this about landowners and owner-occupiers. How are we going in the renter space? Do we know yet, and you know, that data stuff is great, I'm really looking forward to being able to dive into that. Do we have a sense yet of how many of these properties are rental properties as opposed to owner-occupiers? Do we have a sense yet of whether there's some work that needs to be done with landlords around you know, situations where perhaps they're not coming into the process or not fixing a home that actually, you know, would qualify?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Unfortunately, I think I did promise you that I could come back to you with data in relation to the navigation service and how many people we were supporting who are renters versus homeowners. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that. It's a manual process at the moment, but we're looking at how we capture data for the future so that we can record that more efficiently. What is clear is that we are finding more and more tenants who are requiring support. It's still not huge numbers in the scheme of things, but it certainly is on the increase. We are also starting to hear, as we're narrowing in on those areas that we know are likely to be in that high risk area, that there's more reports of those being rental properties, and that we're going to have to, as part of the strategy that Matt has talked to, reach out directly and think about how we engage with those landlords.
Councillor, there's around about 100 properties that haven't opted in that we clearly think should have. We can see that from the modelling and the engineering work that we're doing and how the categorisation is progressing around them. And my suspicion would be that a high proportion of those would be renters, and that's why there hasn't been an opt-in from the landlord. So that's the door knocking should pick up a whole bunch of those too.
So just to follow up on that then, I mean, one of the issues there about, about door knocking, and really glad we're doing that, is we're still going to be talking potentially to the wrong person. The person who lives in the house, the ability to contact the owner may be quite limited. So I guess what are we doing in that sort of space? Are we working with any of the property management companies and things like that who may be able to shortcut some of those conversations with landlords?
Kia ora. Yes, we aren't yet, but it is something that we are intending to do.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, just indicating I'll leave after this item as I'm not well.
We'll get well soon. Councillor Turner, please.
Thank you. I'm kind of struggling to get a grip on, get a stake in the ground here, sort of, 14 months on, and the project seems more like a legit, a wobbly blob than it does a form structure of some sort, and the lines keep moving. So we had a presentation in October. We were given a big figure on top of the first slide, at half by the bottom of the second slide, and then we got into the figures that are publicly known now: 700 million for the buyout, 400 million for making space for water. There was another tens of millions there, a decent sum, especially for Auckland Transport, all to help with recovery costs. And I'd sat there and in my mind been slicing chunks off as I heard different figures told to me. But now I keep hearing about us negotiating and how, and then the next, and so that's a division where the line just seems to be going all over the place. And the next division is between recovery and preparedness. There's an ever-moving line there too, because, in that preparedness space, there's a whole bunch of other council considerations and departments, like, modelling for the future and, and drains being 100% blocked if they're under, having to model them as if they're under 600 mils in diameter. Arguments between whether you should model 3.8 degrees or 2.1 degrees C. I'm not trying to sidetrack the discussion. I'm just trying to say that I can't get a handle on this thing of where we're actually at. I'd like to know how much we've spent on our process and how much is left to pay people.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. You're right, it is really difficult to get a handle on. All of the things that you've talked about in terms of the numbers that were negotiated last year with central government, 700 million this, etc., were all estimates. Estimates before we barely started categorisation, barely begun to implement the categorisation process and understand the reality of what is now unfolding in front of us as we get really, really stuck into the categorisation.
Excuse, but the thick figure of what you've got to spend wasn't an estimate, was it? We were, you know, well, it was $1 billion from each of us, wasn't it? It was $1 billion from government, $1 billion from us, $2 billion locked in to this recovery thing. That's what happened at the beginning, correct?
It's all based on estimates. An estimate of 700 Category 3 properties, an estimate of how difficult or easy dozens of 2C projects were going to be, engineering solutions that could barely be considered because we hadn't got into the areas and started the categorisation process, estimate upon estimate upon estimate.
So I understand that. So are you telling me that those two big figures we heard, they too are legit, can be moved around? Were they only estimates too? I thought we'd agreed on a budget.
There are specific elements of those agreements with central government that are negotiable in good faith once we get into the work on the ground. In particular, the number of 700 Category 3 homes. There's a clause in the agreement with government that if that 700 number that we base that calculation on is wrong, either up or down, particularly up, that they will talk to us in good faith about that number. I must stress that all the other regions are finding, you know, they're having to relook at these estimates as well now. I mean, if you look at the calculations that are done for woody debris on the East Coast, they've gone back to central government and have reopened the calculation. All of these works around the country were done upon estimates.
We went to the public though, because we had to get you know, for them to say, yes, we can spend this money. And that was all just on an estimate. Is that what you're telling me? The public said yes, and we even identified what it would affect the rates by and all that sort of stuff. How can it be an estimate?
And to finish the answer to your original question, Councillor, we have no intention, and there is no indication that the overall envelope, the $2 billion that you talked about, is not sufficient. We're planning to and working to keep within that envelope. But part of the conversation is the different buckets, for want of a word, that make up that envelope and what the actual numbers for each of those buckets are now, and flexibility between the buckets.
Thank you. Got my first box squared up. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Henderson, please.
Hey, thank you. Just picking up on the Deputy Mayor's question, because I've been really concerned about the health and wellbeing side of this. Hearing, you know, relationship breakdowns and severe mental health situations. I'm concerned about the resourcing required. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that, whether you're hearing from providers that more resourcing is needed and if there's anything we can do about that.
Thanks, Councillor. Look, I guess the first thing I want to reassure everyone here and those who are potentially listening online is that most people, no matter what terrible experience they had during their event, no matter how hard it is now, most people will get by just with support from their friends and their families. And the things that council does really, really well, like provide amazing libraries that provide opportunities for connections or local events that bring people together, that is a massive contributor to wellbeing. And for most people, that's going to be enough. So the more we can do of the things that council already does really well, the better. For those small proportion, though, that do require more clinical kind of one-on-one support, we certainly were hearing that there were issues pre-Christmas about extended waiting lists or no provision in the right places. And that was the point at which we went and talked to Te Whatuora and MSD about funding that they had received. And we were able to bring that money into the recovery office and distribute it to community and social service and mental health providers to just get us through that little gap over Christmas. So that was great. We were able to get that money out quickly. We have since distributed a further $1.4 million to providers across the region, doing a range of things, right from kind of that one-on-one counselling support through to, you know, activities that bring young people together or connect people back to the hour. So I'm feeling pretty good right now about where we're at for the next, probably through to the end of this year. my concern is probably in the longer term, but I think we've got time to work through that.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, and Lotto Foley will complete the questions. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, team, for your hard work as well. Yeah, I'm just wanting to reflect back people in my community in Mangere who are affected, and I'm mindful that we've talked a lot in the past about needing to prioritise areas like Mangere where we know it's an area of high deprivation that was devastated by the weather events, and an area where many of the homeowners there who were affected are less likely to have the resources to respond on their own. But I'm hearing more recently from the community that very few of them are being offered the buyouts or being categorised as Category 3. So I'm keen to hear and understand how we are prioritising Mangere if the result is actually very few will be offered buyouts. And then I've got a couple of other questions as well. Kia ora.
Thanks, Councillor. A couple of points. We have worked really closely with Kāinga Ora over the last 3 or 4 months, in particular to support them to effectively categorise their homes in the same way that we're categorising everybody else's. So they're using the same metrics and process and approach to dealing with the homes that they have tenanted. And a considerable number of the homes that are affected in Mangere are Kāinga Ora homes. So we intentionally did that and reached out to Kāinga Ora to help accelerate what was happening there, because it's a subsequently small number really are private rather than Kāinga Ora's. So they're making good progress in terms of categorisation in inverted commas of the homes there. We've begun now to segregate the 2C, the community level infrastructure projects around Auckland, into 3 batches, for want of a better word. There's a batch of projects which we think we can get done and completed and constructed within a couple of years, which seems about as reasonable as it could get for someone to have to wait for a project to be completed to help protect their home. 2 of those projects, those ones that we can prioritise and can get moving quickly, are in Mangere. 2 of the 4, the top 4 that we can get going quickly, will be in Mangere.
Kia ora, thank you. That leads nicely to my next question, which is around the 2C projects, and I'm thankful to Caroline and Nick, who met with myself and Councillor Alf and Chair Tawanu'u, who explained that a little bit better. If those 2C projects do go ahead and we get the funding from the government, what happens to the homes that are still intolerable risks to life if they don't have enough insurance, if they are not Kāinga Ora and they are privately owned? Will they, if there are some homeowners in those 2C project areas who still might prefer to go for the buyout, are they able to do that, or will they not be eligible because they're part of that 2C project?
There's a number of different ways of answering that question in terms of 2C versus Category 3, and we've broached this subject before with you about how long is too long for a homeowner to have to wait in a Category 2C situation until the infrastructure is built. That's next Wednesday's conversation. That's a key part of the workshop that we want to have with you next Wednesday, to talk about that. How long's too long? When does the 2C become a Cat 3?
Kia ora, thank you, and I appreciate we've got that workshop coming up. And just last question, you asked for volunteers, and I know Councillor Alf, who's listening, is keen to volunteer as well. Yeah, would be keen to volunteer. What is it that you actually would require of us? Can I throw him in the back of a van and we drive home to home door knocking, or?
Well, if he's still got bad knees, you might need to bring him in a van, eh? Yeah, an hour or 2 here and there. It's just some feedback on, we think this data would be useful to you, and you'd say, yes, it is, that's brilliant, or could you also add this, this, and this?
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thanks very much for that. That was moved by the Deputy Mayor and seconded by Mr Walker, Councillor Walker. All those in favour of accepting that and recognising that we have put a finish date of the 30th of September on this, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, carried. Thank you very much for that. We're going to move to item 11, which is the consideration of the 2024-25